Clay is older than agriculture, older than writing, older than the wheel. The earliest known ceramic object dates to roughly 29,000 years ago. Long before anyone thought to put paint on a canvas, humans were shaping wet earth and hardening it with fire, which makes what happens next all the more strange. For most of the 20th century, that history counted for almost nothing in the art world. Painting was art, sculpture was art, ceramics, it was craft. The distinction wasn't aesthetic, it was social. Craft was associated with the domestic, the functional, the feminine, things made by hand, things that had a use. Uselessness was the mark of seriousness, and clay, the most universal material in human history, spent decades as an outsider, present everywhere in human culture, almost nowhere in the art world. That's changing. More on that in the next part. Craft art distinction was never neutral, it was structural. Gillian Lowndes was one of the most radical British artists of the 20th century. She mixed clay with scrap metal, wire mesh, loofahs, bulldog clips. She called herself a gatherer of impedimenta. The work looked alive, like it might wriggle off the plinth. The art world ignored her because she worked in ceramics. The craft world found the work too strange, too ugly by their standards. It was removed from exhibitions early, twice shut out, belonging nowhere. The critic Peter Fuller dismissed her as trendy trash. She died in 2010, her work held in the collections of the V&A, the Fitzwilliam, the Hepworth Wakefield, and almost entirely unknown outside specialist circles. The Holborn Museum gave her a major retrospective in 2024, 14 years after her death. Lowndes is not a footnote, she's a diagnosis. Something shifted, and it didn't shift because the art world became a more open-minded place. It shifted because the ceramic traditions that had always been dismissed, African, Latin American, East Asia, indigenous, began arriving in institutional spaces with such a force the hierarchy could not absorb. These traditions weren't new to seriousness. They were traditions the Western art world had chosen not to see. When Simone Leigh represented the United States in the 2022 Venice Biennale with work rooted in the ceramic traditions of the African diaspora, it won the Golden Lion, the most prestigious prize in contemporary art, awarded to work made at its foundation from clay. Theaster Gates describes clay as the humblest of materials underneath everything. He's built a career demonstrating that underneath everything is exactly where the most important conversations are taking place. South African artist Adil Dilivinya works in large-scale clay forms that carry the weight of Khalsa ancestral memory and ritual. This practice didn't wait for Western institutional permission, it never needed it. Ceramic auction lots grew from under 700 in 2016 to 6,200 by 2025. The prices remain humble by the standards of painting, but the direction is clear and the institutions are following. The craft art distinction was never neutral, it was structural, and it's being dismantled not by the art world generously expanding its horizons, but by artists who made the hierarchy look dishonest. What is happening in ceramics right now is not a trend. Trends are light, they arrive and leave without consequence. This is something slower. A medium that was shut out of the conversation for most of a century is now being used by some of the most rigorous practitioners working today. Not despite its association with craft and labor and the domestic, but because of them. Because those associations were always where the real material was. Anushka Sams uses play to get at what she calls the anguish that can only be expressed through texture and goo. Amy J. Wilson builds configurations that fold images back into themselves until you can't tell what is real and what is representation. Abby Freckleton spent more than a year without a studio and came back to make work from everything that had accumulated in her absence. What emerged was a record of 10 years of making. Matthew Smith, Karen David, Helena Lacey, Daniel DeJohnny Clark, Emma Black, Juliet Ferguson Rose, 10 artists, one material, very different arguments in the conversations that follow. Each of them talks about what the material does that nothing else can. That conversation is worth your time.